let's talk about generational wealth. More specifically, let's talk about the number one asset you must pass on to the next generation to have success. But before we do that, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and then the notification bell so that you get all the notifications of the content and material that I'm releasing on a regular basis. I'm Eric L. Donovan, the Mindset Disruption Strategist. So, generational wealth, we talk about a lot because this idea is, how can I take what I'm stewarding today and create it in a way to be a blessing to the generations that come after me? But so many times, what we think is that generational wealth is about what we're doing financially. And I'm going to tell you and caution you that that's not the number one asset. That's not the number one place that you need to start. So what is it? Well, the number one asset that we need to pass is wisdom. Wisdom. And I'm going to show you through different scriptures and give you some ideas on how you can practically work on passing wisdom inside of your family and for generations. But let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, it's really interesting because King Solomon was the wealthiest and wisest man who has ever lived. And this is what he had to say about passing wisdom and why this is so important. He said, wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. A lot of words, a lot of wise words in there. I actually like the way that Ron Blue said this, kind of paraphrased it. And he said, money will never turn into wisdom, but wisdom may turn into money. If all we leave our heirs is money, if that's all we leave in generational wealth, it may be fleeting. If all we can leave in generational wealth is wisdom, wisdom may turn into money. And that is the ultimate goal, is to equip our children and our grandchildren and those who come after us to be successful in what they're doing. So how can we think about passing wisdom? Well, again, as I said, I think there's three ways that we need to think about it. The first is a wisdom that lasts for 3 generations. Why do I say 3 generations? Well, let me show you where I get that from. First, Proverbs 13:22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And a lot of us read that, it's like, right, I leave a financial inheritance to my children's children. Maybe. But think about it from this standpoint. Inside of your family, who will you most likely have a relationship? Who most likely will you be able to speak into the life of? Well, your children and your grandchildren, which are your children's children. 3 generations. You're probably not going to get a chance to build a relationship and speak into the life of your great-grandchildren. Maybe, but more than likely not. So what if this inheritance that God is calling us to leave is a relational inheritance, a wisdom inheritance, rather than this idea of focusing only on the financial? And if that was the case, how would we do that? Well, I think that there's a pretty easy way. I think that we look at this by equipping our children and our grandchildren with vision. What do I mean by that? Well, speaking over them, writing out in letters and physically the vision and possibility that you see inside of each child and inside of each grandchild. Can you imagine what your life would be like if you had letters from your grandfather or your grandmother that were just talking to you about the vision that they see for your life, from your mom or from your dad? Here's what I know. Most of us are walking around with a lot of self-doubt. We're just kind of like, I don't know what I think of myself. The other thing that I know is, as a parent, when I look at my kids, man, I think a lot of great things about them. I really think a lot of things that would lift them up. Do I always speak them? No. Life gets busy, things come running the way. Like, I might look at my daughter and be like, man, She has an amazing voice. I love the way that she sings. I love the way that she loves others. I love the potential. And if I sat down and took the time to write that out, and that's what I'm going to tell you, if you want to pass generational wealth for 3 generations in the form of wisdom, sit down and take the time to write a vision for each of your children and for each of your grandchildren that will pass on wisdom to them in ways that you could never even imagine. So that takes care of 3 generations. We cast a vision over our children and grandchildren. What about next? Well, let's think about wisdom for 5 generations, because we're talking about generational wealth, right? Generational wealth from a wisdom standpoint. So where do I come up with 5 generations? Why 5? Well, this is going to take a little bit longer, but stay with me because we're going to read this in Psalm 78, 5-7. I want you to count these with me, right? For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, generation 1, that they should make them known to their children. Okay, now generation 2, that the generation to come might know them. That's the generation after, generation 3. The children, generation 4, who would be born, and that they may arise and declare them to their children. 5 generations, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. Passing on this wisdom for 5 generations. Well, we've already had this discussion about the fact that relationally, more than likely, you're not going to pass relationship more than 3 generations. But what could we pass? What could we do in a way that builds 5 generations of wisdom? And I think that the big way to do that is through family values, right? Creating a mutual understanding and consensus for the values and purpose of the family. Here's what it means to be our family. And there are different exercises out there. If you want to reach out to me, I have some exercises that we use with people to help them build family values through an afternoon activity. But I'm going to tell you this, taking the time to create family values builds an anchor point for the entire family. But the other thing that you need to be careful of inside of this, especially as we're thinking 5 generations, is letting your children and your grandchildren speak into what these values are, what they mean to them, and making sure that there's consensus, right? This is not about mom and dad coming down from on high like Moses off of Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments. This is about creating a place where we've pulled the values together and we're all in consensus. And they may mean different, they may have different applications in different family members. That's okay. But what I found is families who can unite around values. I've known one specific family who has a letter from their great-grandfather about what it means to be a member of their family, right? The values, the purpose. And I truly believe that families who take the time to build this in can take this for multi-generations, because 3 or 4 generations, even if you're not here to build relationship, the values and the purpose of the family and what this family stands for are anchored inside of the family unit itself. Maybe it goes for 6 or 7, but the promise I see from God is at least for 5. And as we're talking about generational wealth, we've seen how to hit 3. We see how to hit 5 here by doing our values and working through making that a purpose that the family can come around. Now, what could be next, Eric? We've gone 3 generations. We've looked at 5 from a generational wealth standpoint. What else? Well, what about eternal wisdom, right? One of the things that I like to say is we're building generational prosperity for today, for tomorrow, and for eternity. This life is short. In the scope of eternity, this life is but a blip. And so our responsibility is not just to give wisdom for this age, but also for what comes after as we go to meet Christ and our Creator, and we face the judgment that comes with that. How do we pass on the wisdom that gives us an eternal legacy, generational wealth that lasts into eternity? And I love the way that this is said by Paul in 2 Corinthians 5:20-21. Now, we are ambassadors for Christ. As though God were pleading through us, we implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. To pass on eternal wisdom, we become ambassadors for Christ. An ambassador goes and takes the message to a foreign land and is an evangelist for it, champions it, explains what they stand for. And you're like, well, Eric, how do I do this? Especially in this time of, we deal with maybe heirs who walk away from God, or heirs who, are maybe confrontational at times. Again, our job is to be an ambassador. One thing I'll encourage you with, which is not on my slides here, but there's a scripture that says, raise up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. For those of you who are dealing with prodigals or dealing with people who are running away, it's like, man, I just don't know that there's any hope. Press into the hope of the return. Press into the hope of them coming back, and that God has them in a season where they're just learning right now and building their own testimony. And some may not come back. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but do we remain an ambassador? Because God says when they are old, they will not depart from it. But it doesn't say that they won't struggle while they're young, or they won't struggle while they're maturing. So how do we do this? Well, the way that I've found this to work well inside of families is giving your heirs a voice. Creating an environment that encourages respectful disagreement. And the way that I like to say this is give your heirs a voice, not a vote. Most people simply want to be heard. That's it. They just want to know that they're being heard. So they don't get a vote. They don't get to change my mind or change our opinion or change what we're doing inside of our family. But we're going to hear them and we're going to listen to them, and there's going to be respectful disagreement. And what this also forces both sides to do is to listen. And as an ambassador for Christ, now we're imparting spiritual truth, biblical truth into our children and our grandchildren. And when we give them that truth, now it's up to the Holy Spirit and God to work through them and in them to change their hearts. But if we don't have an environment for respectful disagreement, if we don't give a place to give them a voice, then what we create is a separation. We create a chasm, a gap in which no communication is happening. And so as we've talked about today, there is an opportunity, and the number one asset you have to pass is wisdom. You can pass wisdom for 3 generations by casting vision. You can cast wisdom for 5 generations by creating values as a family. And then finally, creating eternal wisdom by giving your heirs a voice. Do not miss this opportunity in creating your generational wealth. It is the top priority that every family needs to address. God bless you. Have a great day.